Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city eye now. Back he thought the wedding would seal his empire. He thought the white roses, the golden candles, and the cathedral filled with powerful men meant control. But Dante Moretti, the most feared mafia boss in Chicago, was about to learn that judgment did sometimes. It came wearing a black Maid. The cathedral was silent except for the soft breath of the organ. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, breaking into red, blue, and gold across the marble floor. Every guest had been carefully chosen: politicians, businessmen, family allies, men with cold eyes and expensive watches. No one had come just to celebrate love. They had come to W. At the altar stood Dante Moretti. Tall, still, dressed in a black tailored suit. He looked less like a groom and more like a king accepting tribute. His face revealed nothing. Not joy, not fear. Beside him stood Isabella Romano, his bride-to-be. Her white gown shimmered beneath the cathedral lights, every diamond on her neck chosen to remind the room that she had won. One hand rested gently over her stomach, the small just the child. That was WH, not because he trusted Isabella completely, not because his heart had softened, but because in his world, a child carried blood, name, legacy. And Dante Moretti had been raised to believe that a man protected his own, even if it cost him every. From the back of the cathedral, Grace Carter walked. She was sup, just the M. That was what Isabella had called her all morning while ordering her to fix flowers, carry trays, clean spilled champagne, and disappear before the important guests arrived. Grace still wore her simple black uniform, a white apron tied around her waist. Her shoes were old, poleless, but H in her pocket, folded so tightly the paper had softened at the edges, was a document that could destroy the wedding before the final DNA test. Grace had read it 3 times the night before, each time hoping she had misunderstood. She had worked in a medical lab once, before bills, sickness, and grief pushed her into service work. She knew what the numbers meant. She knew what the conclusion meant. Dante Moretti was not the father, and Isabella knew. At the altar, the priest lifted his book. Do you, Dante Moretti, take Isabella Romano to be your wife? 1,000 eyes turned toward him. Dante inhaled slowly. Isabella smiled. Grace felt her heartbeat slam against her ribs. Her fingers trembled, but her feet moved before fear could stop her. Down the side aisle, past the flowers, past the staring guests. A bodyguard stepped forward to block her. Dante noticed. For one strange second, his dark eyes met Grace's from across the cathedral. He saw the fear on her face. But beneath it, he saw something stronger. Truth. He gave the smallest nod. The guard stepped aside. Gasps moved through the room as Grace approached the altar. Isabella's smile vanished. Grace leaned close to Dante, her voice barely more than breath. Sir, the DNA test results are real. Dante froze before the word, I do, could leave his mouth. The cathedral went silent. 3 months before that whisper froze an entire cathedral. Grace Carter walked through the iron gates of the Moretti estate with one suitcase, one pair of polished black shoes, and a heart trained to survive quietly. The mansion rose above Lake Michigan like a palace built from secrets. White stone walls, black steel balconies, windows tall enough to reflect the sky. Every inch of it whispered wealth, but not comfort. There was no warmth in that house, only rules. Do not ask questions. Do not enter private rooms unless instructed. Do not speak unless spoken to. And above all, never forget your place. Grace understood rules. Life had given her plenty. At 32, she had already lived several lives. Once, she had worn a clean white coat in a medical laboratory, labeling samples under fluorescent lights, reading numbers that told painful truths. She had been good at it, careful, exact, the kind of woman who checked twice because someone's future could depend on one result. Then her mother got sick. Bills came first slowly, then all at once. Hospital envelopes, rent notices, phone calls from people who used polite voices to deliver cruel deadlines. Grace left the lab, took whatever work she could find, and learned that dignity did not disappear just because the world stopped noticing it. At the Moretti estate, she became invisible by necessity. She cleaned crystal glasses that cost more than her monthly rent. She folded silk shirts still warm from expensive cologne. She polished marble floors until her reflection looked back at her like a ghost. Most people in the house walked past her without seeing her. But Isabella Romano saw her. Not as a person, As a target. Grace. Isabella called one morning from the grand dining room, her voice sweet enough to fool anyone who did not know better. Come here. Grace stepped in quietly. Isabella sat beneath a chandelier dripping with light, surrounded by wedding planners, florists, and women who laughed too loudly at every small joke she made. Her diamond engagement ring flashed each time she lifted her hand. A vase of white roses stood in the center of the table. Do you see this? Isabella asked, pointing at one petal lying on the marble floor. Grace looked down. Yes, ma'am. Then why is it still there? The room went still. A few women exchanged amused glances. Grace bent to pick it up. Isabella leaned back in her chair and smiled. You have to be careful with people like her. They get comfortable very quickly. Someone laughed. Grace kept her eyes lowered. That was what they expected. Silence. Shame. A bowed head. But silence was not always weakness. Sometimes it was discipline. Sometimes it was the only thing standing between a woman and a storm she could not afford to enter. From the doorway, Dante Moretti appeared. The laughter faded instantly. He wore a charcoal suit, his black shirt open at the collar, revealing the edge of a tattoo that disappeared beneath the fabric. His presence changed the air. Men twice Grace's size lowered their eyes when he entered a room. Dante glanced at the petal in Grace's hand. Then at Isabella. What happened? He asked. Isabella smiled, sliding easily into innocence. Nothing, darling. I was only reminding the staff to be careful. The wedding is in 3 months. Everything has to be perfect. Dante's eyes moved to Grace. For 1 second, he seemed to truly look at her. Not through her, her. Grace felt the weight of it, sharp and uncomfortable. Then he turned away. Make sure it is, he said. Isabella's smile returned. Grace stepped back into the hallway, the rose petal crushed softly in her palm. Behind her, the women began laughing again, softer this time, but not kinder. She kept walking. No one noticed the way her hand trembled. No one noticed the way she held herself together. And no one knew that the woman they kept calling just the maid would soon be the only person in that mansion brave enough to protect Dante Moretti from the lie standing beside him in white. The rehearsal dinner was held in the West Ballroom, a room built to make ordinary people feel small. Crystal chandeliers floated above the ceiling like frozen stars. Gold-rimmed plates lined the long table. White roses spilled from silver vases, their petals so perfect they looked untouched by weather, dirt, or life. Outside, the lake was black beneath the evening sky, but inside the Moretti estate, everything glittered. Grace moved quietly between the chairs, refilling water glasses, replacing forks, collecting empty plates before anyone had to ask. She had learned how to disappear in motion. But that night, Isabella did not want her invisible. She wanted her useful, not as a maid, as a warning. The guests were laughing when Isabella lifted her glass and tapped one manicured nail against it. Everyone, she said, smiling toward the room. Before we continue, I just want to thank the staff for trying their best tonight. A few polite smiles passed around the table. Grace froze near the wall, holding a tray of folded napkins. Isabella turned her head slowly, her eyes landing on Grace like a hand closing around a throat. Especially Grace. The room shifted. People turned. Grace felt the heat of attention rise against her skin. Dante sat at the head of the table, silent, one hand resting near his untouched wine glass. His face was unreadable, but his eyes moved from Isabella to Grace. Isabella stood, smoothing the front of her pale silk dress. One hand rested briefly on her stomach, the gesture soft enough to look maternal, calculated enough to command sympathy. She has been working so hard, Isabella continued. Though I suppose we cannot expect everyone to understand how delicate events like this are. Grace kept her posture straight. Did I do something wrong, ma'am? She asked quietly. That was her mistake. The room heard her. Isabella's smile sharpened. Oh, sweetheart. That's exactly the problem. You never seem to know when you've done something wrong. A few people laughed under their breath. Grace looked down at the tray in her hands. At the far end of the table, Isabella's mother leaned toward another woman and whispered loudly enough for Grace to hear. This is why proper households train their help before hiring them. The laughter grew. Grace stood still. Then Isabella reached for her wine glass. No one saw the way her fingers tipped it too far. No one except Grace. Red wine spilled down the front of Isabella's dress, spreading like a wound across the pale fabric. Isabella gasped. The entire table erupted. "Oh my God," someone said. Grace stepped forward instinctively. "Ma'am, let me get a cloth." Isabella slapped the tray from Grace's hands. Napkins scattered across the marble floor. "Don't touch me." The words cracked through the ballroom. Grace stopped. Isabella's eyes shone, but not with tears. With performance. "This dress was custom made in Milan," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound wounded. "Do you have any idea what you've ruined?" Grace looked at the stain, then at the glass still in Isabella's hand. "I didn't spill it," she said softly. The room went colder. Isabella tilted her head. "Excuse me." Grace swallowed. "I was standing over there. I didn't touch your glass." A man from the Romano family scoffed. "Now she's calling the bride a liar?" Another voice muttered, "Unbelievable." Isabella stepped closer. Her perfume was sweet, heavy, suffocating. "Listen to me carefully," she whispered, though everyone could hear. "People like you survive in houses like this because powerful people allow it. Do not confuse employment with importance." Grace's fingers curled at her sides. Dante's jaw tightened. For a second, Grace thought he might speak. But Isabella turned toward him first, tears now shining perfectly in her eyes. "Dante," she said, placing a hand on her stomach. "I don't want stress tonight. Not with the baby." The baby. The word changed the room. Dante's expression closed again, like a door locking from the inside. Grace saw it happen. Responsibility swallowing doubt. Silence chosen over conflict. Isabella saw it too. Her smile returned, small and victorious. "Clean it up," she said to Grace. "That is what you are here for." Grace bent slowly to gather the fallen napkins. One by one. Around her, the guests resumed whispering. Forks touched plates. Glasses lifted. The world moved on, as it always did after hurting someone it considered replaceable. But as Grace reached beneath the table for the last napkin, she heard Isabella lean toward her mother and speak in a voice low enough for most people to miss. "After the wedding, he'll never question the baby again." Grace's hand stopped. Her breath caught. For the first time that night, she was not thinking about humiliation. She was thinking about danger. And across the ballroom, Dante Moretti sat in silence, unaware that the lie beside him had just begun to crack. Top of form, bottom of form, that sentence followed Grace through the rest of the night. After the wedding, he'll never question the baby again. It echoed beneath the clatter of plates, beneath the polished laughter of the Romano guests, beneath the soft music drifting through the ballroom like nothing ugly had happened. Grace kept moving because stopping would invite more attention. She collected glasses, replaced napkins, wiped the stain Isabella had made, and blamed on her. But inside, something had shifted. Grace had spent most of her life knowing when to stay silent. Silence had helped her survive hospital hallways when doctors spoke in careful tones about her mother. Silence had carried her through rent offices, job interviews, and rooms where people looked at her uniform before they looked at her face. But this silence felt different. This silence had a victim. Dante Moretti sat at the head of the table, cold and composed, believing he was doing the honorable thing. Everyone feared him. Everyone obeyed him. Men whispered his name like a warning. And yet, somehow, the most dangerous man in Chicago was being led toward a lie with flowers, vows, and a white dress. Near midnight, after the guests had gone and the ballroom looked like the aftermath of a beautiful storm, Grace was sent upstairs to clean the bridal suite. Isabella had changed there before dinner, leaving behind perfume in the air and evidence of her impatience everywhere. Shoes kicked near the velvet bench. Jewelry boxes open. A torn stocking on the floor. A champagne flute abandoned beside the mirror with a crescent of red lipstick on its rim. Grace worked quietly. She gathered silk robes from the chair and folded them with care, even though no one would thank her for it. She wiped powder from the vanity. She collected tissues, ribbons, and scraps of wrapping paper from the floor. Then she saw it. A white envelope, half buried in the silver trash bin beside the desk. At first, it meant nothing. Then Grace saw the logo. Hawthorne Genetic Diagnostics. Her fingers went cold. She stood still, staring down at the envelope as if it might move on. Its own. A person could ignore a torn note. A person could pretend not to see a name on a page. But Grace had worked in a medical lab long enough to understand what that logo meant. She had sorted forms with logos like that. She had entered data that changed marriages, families, futures. She should have walked away. Instead, she looked toward the closed door. The hallway outside was silent. Grace bent slowly and lifted the envelope from the trash. It had been ripped once across the top, then crumpled, as if someone had tried to destroy it and lost patience halfway through. Inside were folded pages, creased hard at the center. Grace opened them with hands that no longer felt like her own. The first page listed names. Dante Antonio Moretti, unborn child Romano. Alleged paternity report. Grace stopped breathing. No, she whispered. She read further. The numbers were arranged in neat columns, clean and emotionless. Genetic markers. Probability. Exclusions. A language most people would skim past without understanding. But Grace understood. Her old training returned with painful clarity, each line sharpening the truth. Dante Moretti was excluded as the biological father. The probability was not uncertain, not questionable, not close. It was final. Grace's knees weakened, and she reached for the edge of the desk to steady herself. Outside, thunder rolled over the lake. She read it again, praying her eyes had betrayed her. They had not. The baby was not Dante's, and Isabella had hidden the truth. Grace folded the pages quickly, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was not gossip. This was not some small private betrayal. In Dante's world, bloodlines meant loyalty, inheritance, alliances. A lie like this could start a war between families. It could put an innocent child at the center of something dangerous before that child was even born. A sound came from the hallway. Grace froze. Footsteps. Soft. Slow. Coming closer. She shoved the report into the pocket of her apron and grabbed the nearest cloth from the vanity. The door opened. Isabella stood there in a silk robe, her hair loose over one shoulder, her eyes immediately narrowing. "Grace," she said, "why are you still in here?" Grace lowered her gaze. "Finishing the room, ma'am." Isabella looked around. Her eyes moved from the desk to the trash bin, then back to Grace. For one long moment, neither woman spoke. The air changed. Isabella stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "You didn't touch anything on that desk, did you?" Grace's hand tightened around the cloth. "No, ma'am." Isabella smiled. But there was no beauty in it now. Only warning. "Good," she whispered. "Because some things in this house are far above a maid's understanding." Grace held her breath as Isabella walked past her, close enough for her perfume to burn. But in Grace's pocket, the truth pressed against her hip like a living thing. And for the first time since entering the Moretti mansion, Grace understood that being invisible might no longer save her. Grace did not sleep that night. She lay on the narrow bed in the staff quarters, staring at the ceiling while rain scratched softly against the small window. The DNA report was hidden beneath her mattress, folded inside an old envelope from her mother's hospital. She had placed it there with trembling hands, then spent the next hour wondering whether that was the first place someone like Isabella would look. Every sound in the hallway made her heart stop. A door closing, a pipe shifting in the walls, the low murmur of guards changing posts downstairs. The Moretti estate had never felt safe, but now it felt alive, watching her. By morning, Grace knew what she had to do. She had to tell Dante. Not because he was kind. Not because he had defended her. He had not. He had watched her humiliation at dinner and chosen silence. But the truth did not belong to Isabella just because she had hidden it. And no child deserved to be born into a lie sharpened by ambition. Grace waited until after breakfast, when Dante usually took coffee alone in his study. She carried the silver tray herself. 2 guards stood outside the double doors, broad men in black suits with earpieces and empty expressions. One of them looked down at her. Mr. Moretti didn't ask for anything. Grace kept her voice calm. "He always has coffee at 9. Not from you." She swallowed. "Please. It's important." The guard's eyes narrowed. Everything is important to somebody. Before Grace could answer, the door opened behind him. Dante stood there, sleeves rolled to his forearms, a phone in one hand. His face was hard with whatever conversation he had just ended. His gaze dropped to the tray, then rose to Grace. "What is it?" Grace's fingers tightened around the handles. For one moment, the words were there. Right there, waiting behind her teeth. "Sir, Isabella is lying. The baby is not yours. I found the report." But the hallway behind her shifted. Isabella appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed in cream silk, one hand resting on the polished railing. She smiled as if she had been standing there the whole time. "Darling," she called softly, "the florist is waiting." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. Dante glanced toward Isabella, then back at Grace. Speak. Isabella began descending the stairs slowly. Each step sounded like a warning. Grace looked at Dante, then at the guards, then at Isabella's perfect smile. She understood then that telling the truth in a hallway full of loyal men was not courage. It was suicide for the truth itself. Isabella would deny it. The report would vanish. Grace would be removed before anyone checked. So Grace lowered her eyes. Your coffee, sir. Dante stared at her for a second longer, as if he had heard the words she had not spoken. Then he took the cup. Leave it. Grace stepped back. As she turned, Isabella caught her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise in front of witnesses, just hard enough to remind her who still held power in this house. Walk with me, Grace, Isabella said. It was not a request. They moved down the corridor toward the bridal fitting room, away from the guards, away from Dante, away from anyone who might care. Once inside, Isabella closed the door. The smile disappeared. Do you think I don't know? She whispered. Grace stood still. Isabella stepped closer. Her perfume filled the room, sweet and suffocating. I saw the trash bin. I saw your face. Women like you always think silence makes you clever. Grace lifted her chin. I don't know what you mean, ma'am. Isabella laughed once, quietly. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a small stack of cash, wrapped in a white ribbon. Take it, she said. Leave tonight. Tell the staff your mother is sick. Cry if you have to. You're good at looking pitiful. Grace looked at the money. For a moment, she saw hospital bills, rent, medicine, a month without fear. Then she saw Dante standing at the altar, about to give his name to a lie. No, Grace said. The room went still. Isabella's eyes hardened. No. Grace's voice trembled, but it did not break. I can't take money for pretending I didn't see what I saw. Isabella moved, so close Grace could feel her breath. Then understand this, she said. A maid who talks too much doesn't just lose her job. She loses the little life she worked so hard to build. Grace's hands shook at her sides. But she remembered her mother's voice, soft from a hospital bed, still full of dignity. You don't need to be powerful to stand with the truth. Isabella opened the door again, her smile returning like a mask. The wedding is tomorrow, she said. Choose wisely. Grace walked back to the staff quarters with the weight of fear pressing against her chest. That night, she took the DNA report from beneath her mattress and hid it inside the lining of her apron. If she could not reach Dante before the wedding, she would reach him at the altar, even if the whole room turned against her, even if her voice was only a whisper. The wedding morning arrived dressed in white. White roses along the staircase, white ribbons tied to the iron gates, white candles waiting inside the cathedral like silent witnesses. Even the sky above Chicago looked pale and polished, as if the city itself had agreed to pretend nothing dark could happen on a day like this. But Grace Carter knew better. She stood in the staff corridor before dawn, tying her apron with fingers that would not stop trembling. Inside the lining, hidden beneath careful stitches, was the folded DNA report. The paper pressed against her waist with every breath. A truth small enough to fit inside cloth, heavy enough to destroy an empire. The house was already alive with movement. Florists hurried through the halls carrying boxes of petals. Security men spoke quietly into radios. Caterers rolled silver carts toward the service entrance. Upstairs, Isabella's bridesmaids filled the bridal suite with perfume, laughter, and the bright sound of women celebrating a victory they did not understand. Grace carried trays, opened doors, collected empty cups. She moved like she always did, silent, efficient, invisible. But today, invisibility felt like a cage. Near the grand staircase, Isabella appeared in her wedding gown. The room seemed to bend around her. Lace, sleeves, a long pearl veil, diamonds at her throat, one hand resting over her stomach, always perfectly placed, always reminding everyone why Dante Moretti would never walk away. Her eyes found Grace immediately. For a moment, the smile stayed on her face. Then she stepped closer. You're still here, Isabella said softly. Grace lowered her gaze. Yes, ma'am. How loyal. Isabella's voice was sweet enough for the bridesmaids behind her to mistake it for kindness. Make sure you stay at the back during the ceremony. No mistakes today. Grace nodded. Isabella leaned in, close enough that only Grace could hear. Remember what I told you. Some truths are too expensive for people like you to speak. Grace felt the report against her apron. Then Isabella was gone, floating down the hallway in white, leaving the scent of roses and warning behind her. By noon, the cathedral was full. Grace stood with the other staff near the rear entrance, holding a small tray of programs no one needed. From where she stood, she could see everything. The guests filled the pews in black suits, silk dresses, diamonds, and cold smiles. The Romano family sat proudly on the bride's side, their faces glowing with satisfaction. The Moretti men sat opposite them, quiet and watchful, their loyalty wrapped in silence. Then Dante entered. The room changed. He walked down the aisle alone, his black suit cut with perfect precision, his face calm, his steps measured. He looked like a man heading into a decision he had already accepted, not because it made him happy, but because he believed duty demanded it. Grace watched him take his place at the altar. For 1 second, something painful moved through her chest. He had power, money, men willing to obey his every command. And still, no one had protected him from this. The music began. Everyone stood. Isabella appeared at the cathedral doors, glowing beneath her veil. Guests smiled. Cameras lifted. Her father offered his arm, and together they began the slow walk toward Dante. Grace's mouth went dry. This was the last chance. If she stayed silent now, the lie would become a vow. The vow would become a marriage. The marriage would become a chain around a child who had done nothing wrong. The priest began speaking. Grace heard almost none of it. Her heartbeat swallowed the words. Her palms grew damp. The bodyguards near the aisle seemed larger than before. Isabella's family seemed sharper, crueler, ready to cut down anyone who interrupted their perfect moment. Then came the question, do you, Dante Moretti, take Isabella Romano to be your wife? Dante inhaled. Isabella smiled. Grace moved. At first, no one noticed. Then a bridesmaid turned. A guest whispered. One of Dante's guards stepped into the aisle and raised a hand. Grace stopped in front of him. Her voice barely came out. Please. The guard's expression did not change. Then Dante looked over. Across the cathedral, his eyes found hers. Grace did not wave, did not cry, did not beg. She only stood there, shaking, with the truth stitched into her apron and fear written plainly across her face. Dante's eyes narrowed. Something passed through the silence between them. Then he gave one small nod. The guard stepped aside. A ripple moved through the pews as Grace walked forward. The marble floor felt endless beneath her feet. Every eye in the cathedral burned into her back. Isabella's face went pale behind the veil. Grace reached the altar. Dante leaned slightly toward her, his voice low. What is it? Grace pulled the folded paper from the hidden seam and placed it in his hand. Then she whispered the sentence that broke the wedding in half. Sir, the DNA test results are real. Dante did not open the paper immediately. For one long second, he only stared at Grace. Her hand was still half raised between them, fingers trembling from the weight of what she had just done. Around them, the cathedral had become unnaturally quiet. No one coughed. No one shifted. Even the organ seemed to hold its breath. Isabella's smile froze beneath the veil. What is this? She asked. Grace did not answer her. She kept her eyes on Dante. Dante unfolded the paper slowly. The sound was small, almost delicate, but it moved through the cathedral like thunder. A few guests leaned forward. Isabella's father rose halfway from his seat, his face tightening with anger. On the Moretti side, men who had seen negotiations collapse and alliances die sat perfectly still. Dante read the first line, then the second. His expression did not change. That was what frightened everyone. A furious man could be understood. A shouting man could be answered. But Dante Moretti standing silent at the altar, eyes moving across a DNA report while his bride waited beside him in white, was something else entirely. It was the moment before judgment. Isabella reached for his arm. Dante, she said softly. Darling, whatever she gave you, it's fake. He did not look at her. His thumb pressed against the bottom of the page, where the final conclusion sat in clean black letters. There was no emotion in the wording, no mercy, no poetry, just a medical truth that had survived every attempt to bury it. Excluded as biological father. Dante's jaw tightened. The priest lowered his book. Mr. Moretti, he whispered. Dante lifted his eyes to Grace. Where did you get this? Grace swallowed. Every instinct told her to apologize, to shrink, to step back into the corner where people like Isabella believed she belonged. But she had not walked all the way to the altar to disappear now. In the bridal suite, she said. Last night. It was torn and thrown away. A sharp sound came from Isabella. A maid digging through trash, she snapped, turning toward the guests. That is what we're listening to now? A jealous servant with stolen paper? Murmurs spread across the pews. Grace stood still. Isabella stepped closer, her veil trembling around her shoulders. She has hated me from the beginning, Isabella said, voice rising. She ruined my rehearsal dinner, embarrassed me in my own home, and now she wants to destroy my wedding because she cannot stand seeing a woman like me chosen. Dante finally turned to her. A woman like you. The words were quiet. Isabella blinked. Dante, please. You know me. No, he said. I know what you wanted me to see. The room went colder. Isabella's father stepped into the aisle. This is absurd. My daughter will not be insulted by household staff on her wedding day. Dante looked at him. The older man stopped walking. No threat was spoken. None was needed. Dante lifted the paper slightly. Did you know? Isabella's mother looked away too quickly. That was enough. A slow understanding passed across Dante's face. Not surprise anymore, but confirmation. Pieces falling into place. The rushed wedding. The pressure from the Romano family. The constant reminder of the baby. The way Isabella had wrapped every conversation in guilt and legacy. He turned toward the front pew. Vincent. His lawyer stood immediately. Dante handed him the report. Verify the lab. Call Dr. Hawthorne. Now. Vincent took the paper, scanned it, and his face lost color. He stepped aside, phone already in hand. Isabella's voice cracked. You're humiliating me. Dante looked at her then, really looked at her. No, he said. You brought me to this altar with a lie. Grace brought me the truth. Grace felt the entire room turn toward her. Some faces held shock. Some shame. Some anger. But no one laughed now. Isabella's mask broke. She is nobody, she hissed. She cleans floors. She carries plates. And you are going to believe her over your future wife. Dante moved one step forward, placing himself between Isabella and Grace. His voice dropped. You will not speak about her like that again. The cathedral went silent. Vincent returned, phone in hand, his expression grim. The report is authentic, he said. The lab confirmed it. A soft gasp moved through the room. Dante closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, the groom was gone. Only the boss remained. He turned to the priest. There will be no wedding today. Isabella stumbled back as if the words had struck her. The bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the marble floor. White roses scattered at Grace's feet. Dante looked down at them, then back at the woman in the maid's uniform who had risked everything to whisper the truth. For the first time since Grace had entered his house, he bowed his head to her. Not deeply, just enough for the whole cathedral to see. And no one dared make a sound. For several seconds after Dante said there would be no wedding, no one moved. The cathedral remained full, but it no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom without benches, a trial without a judge, and every person in the room suddenly understood that the verdict had already arrived. Isabella stood at the altar, breathing hard beneath her veil. The diamonds at her throat trembled with every shallow breath. Her father's face had gone from red to pale. Her mother stared at the marble floor, as if the scattered white roses might somehow hide the truth. Grace stayed where she was, hands folded tightly in front of her apron. She expected anger. She expected someone to drag her away. She expected the Romano family to turn the whole room against her again, the way they had at the rehearsal dinner, with polished voices and cruel smiles. But nobody laughed now. Not one person. Dante took the DNA report back from Vincent and looked at Isabella. Who was the father? The question was quiet, but it cut through the cathedral. Isabella's lips parted. Dante, his name. She looked toward her father. That one glance said more than a confession. Dante followed her eyes. A heavy silence fell over the Romano side of the church. Men who had arrived proud and untouchable now lowered their gazes. The alliance they had planned, the name they had tried to secure, the empire they had almost entered through a lie, all of it began collapsing in front of them. Vincent stepped beside Dante and spoke low enough for only the front rows to hear. The timeline matches someone inside the Romano circle. We can investigate further. Dante did not blink. No need. Isabella's father straightened, trying to recover the authority he had already lost. You should be careful, he said. Public embarrassment has consequences. Dante turned to him fully. For the first time that morning, fear moved through the older man's eyes. Embarrassment. Dante repeated. You brought your daughter into my house. You accepted my protection. You sat at my table. You watched her humiliate a woman who had done nothing but serve with dignity. His gaze moved across the Romano family. And all of you smiled because you thought cruelty was harmless when the victim had no power. No one answered. Dante stepped down from the altar. His shoes touched the marble beside the fallen roses. He stopped in front of Grace, not too close, not above her, but directly before her, as if the entire cathedral needed to understand who deserved attention now. Did anyone help you? He asked. Grace shook her head. No, sir. Did anyone believe you? Her voice was almost a whisper. I didn't tell anyone. Why? Grace looked down for a moment, then lifted her eyes. Because people like me are easy to accuse and hard to defend. The words landed heavier than any shout. Dante's face changed. Not dramatically, not softly, but something inside him seemed to recognize the sentence as a truth he had helped create. In his house, under his roof, she had been insulted because people believed his silence gave them permission. He turned toward the guests. This woman owed me nothing, he said. I gave her no reason to trust me, no reason to believe I would protect her. And still, she risked her safety to stop me from giving my name to a lie. Isabella laughed suddenly, but it broke halfway through. Oh, how noble, she said, tears ruining the perfection of her makeup. You're going to make a hero out of the maid? Dante looked back at her. No, he said. You did. The room went still again. Isabella's mouth closed. Dante handed the report to Vincent. Remove the Romano family from my estate. End every pending agreement. Every contract. Every account. Quietly, legally, completely. Vincent nodded. Consider it done. Isabella's father took one step forward, then stopped when Dante's men stood from the pews. No weapons. No shouting. Just movement. That was enough. The Romanos began leaving one by one, their silk dresses and expensive suits brushing past the same aisle Grace had walked down minutes earlier. Only now, nobody looked at Grace like she was beneath them. Some could not look at her at all. Isabella was the last to go. At the cathedral doors, she turned back, eyes burning. Grace met her gaze. Not with victory, not with hatred, only steadiness. And somehow, that was worse. When the doors closed behind Isabella, the cathedral breathed again. Dante looked at Grace, then at the ruined altar, the fallen bouquet, the witnesses who had come for power and stayed for judgment. Everyone else may leave, he said. No one argued. Within minutes, the grand cathedral emptied into silence, leaving only candlelight, scattered roses, and the woman they had mocked standing at the center of the truth. Grace looked down at the floor. Dante's voice softened behind her. Miss Carter. She turned. For the first time, he did not call her Grace like staff. He called her with respect, and the silence that followed no longer felt dangerous. It felt earned. The cathedral was almost empty now. Only a few candles still burned near the altar, their small flames trembling in the quiet air. White roses lay scattered across the marble floor where Isabella's bouquet had fallen, petals crushed beneath the footsteps of people who had arrived expecting a wedding and left carrying a story they would never forget. Grace Carter stood alone near the aisle, unsure where to place her hands. For months, she had known exactly what to do in every room of the Moretti estate. Carry the tray, fold the linen, polish the silver, lower her eyes, move quietly enough that powerful people could pretend the work did itself. But now no one was asking her to clean. No one was telling her to disappear. And that felt stranger than fear. Dante Moretti stood a few steps away, the DNA report still in his hand. The paper looked small between his fingers, almost harmless. But it had broken an alliance, exposed a lie, and saved him from giving his name to a betrayal dressed in white. For a long moment, he said nothing. Grace finally lowered her gaze. I should return to the house, sir. There will be work to do after, her voice faded. After the wedding that never happened, after the bride was removed, after the truth stood where vows were supposed to be. Dante looked at her carefully. Is that what you think I'm going to ask you to do? Grace did not answer. In her world, messes always found their way back to women like her. Dante folded the report once, then placed it inside his jacket. No, he said quietly. Not today. Grace looked up. The man before her was still dangerous, still powerful, still carrying the weight of a life she could never fully understand. But something in his eyes had changed. Not softness exactly. Something more difficult. Humility. I owe you an apology, he said. Grace blinked, as if she had misheard. Dante Moretti, a man whose name made entire rooms go silent, stood beneath the cathedral candles and lowered his voice to a maid. I watched what happened at the rehearsal dinner, he continued. I saw enough to know you were being humiliated. And I said nothing. Grace's throat tightened. Outside, the faint sound of cars leaving echoed beyond the cathedral doors. I told myself I was keeping peace, Dante said. Protecting the child. Protecting the alliance. But the truth is simpler than that. He paused. I made your dignity less important than my convenience. Grace held very still. No one had ever named it that way before. Not inconvenience. Not drama. Not misunderstanding. Dignity. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall quickly. Some tears deserved to arrive with honor. I didn't do it to hurt anyone, she said. I know. I only thought. Grace swallowed. No baby should begin life inside a lie. And no man should be trapped by one. Dante nodded slowly. Then, to Grace's surprise, he reached down and picked up one of the fallen white roses. Its stem had bent, but the bloom was still whole. He held it out to her. Not like a reward. Like respect. Grace hesitated before taking it. Her fingers brushed the stem, and for the first time since she had entered the Moretti mansion, she did not feel like the help accepting something from the powerful. She felt like a witness to the truth. Dante turned toward the remaining staff near the back of the cathedral. His voice carried without needing to rise. Miss Carter will not return to service today. See that her belongings are moved from the staff quarters to a guest room until she decides what she wants next. Grace's eyes widened. Sir, that isn't necessary. It is, he said. And from this moment forward, no one in my house will speak to you as if you are beneath them. The staff lowered their eyes. Not from fear this time. From shame. Later, people would say Dante Moretti canceled his wedding because of a DNA test. They would whisper about Isabella Romano, the ruined alliance, the silence in the cathedral, and the maid who walked to the altar with truth hidden in her apron. But Grace would remember something smaller. A crushed rose. A quiet apology. A powerful man finally understanding what silence had cost. As she walked out of the cathedral, sunlight touched the marble behind her, turning the scattered petals gold. Dante watched her go, and for the first time in years, he understood that power could protect an empire, but only humility could save a soul. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.